"Mister, are you sick like me too?" A tiny voice echoed through the long marble hallway of the most feared mansion in all of New York. Lily, the 6-year-old daughter of a poor black housekeeper, stood trembling over the body of a man most of the city whispered about only behind locked doors. A man whose name alone made grown men turn pale. A Mafia boss. And in her small, shaking hand, she held a child's asthma inhaler. What happened in the next 60 seconds would not only save his life, it would shatter the walls of an empire built on blood and silence, and awaken a heart that had been frozen for 3 long years. This is a story of healing, hope, and the kind of destiny no one sees coming. If you believe that even the smallest hands can change the hardest hearts, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe before we begin. The hallway of the Moretti mansion stretched long and cold, lined with dark oil paintings and crystal chandeliers that no longer seemed to shine. Little Lily stood alone in that endless corridor, her bare feet pressing into the cold marble floor. She was only 6 years old, with 2 small braids tied behind her ears and a worn pink pajama shirt that had seen better days. Her wide brown eyes were fixed on the figure sprawled across the white stone before her. A tall man, dressed in a sharp black suit, lay motionless on the ground. His cufflinks glinted faintly in the afternoon sun. His powerful chest was no longer rising. His face, once carved with the cold authority of a king, had turned ghostly pale. His lips were tinted a sickly shade of purple, and beside his outstretched hand, an inhaler had rolled a few inches away. Lily's small heart pounded like a drum. Her mother's voice rang in her head, the gentle lesson whispered 1,000 times whenever her own lungs refused to cooperate. "Breathe slowly, baby. Press it. Count to 3. The air will come back." She tiptoed closer, her little fingers tightening around the inhaler she had pulled from her own pocket. She knelt beside the stranger, her knees wobbling. "Mister?" she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "Mister, please." She placed the inhaler gently between his cold lips and pressed. Nothing. She pressed again, her little hand shaking harder. Still nothing. The man did not move, not even a flicker. Tears welled up in Lily's eyes. Her bottom lip trembled as she leaned closer, her small voice cracking with fear. "Please don't die, mister. Please. I'm begging you." She pressed one more time, and then, like a miracle stitched by unseen hands, his chest suddenly rose. A deep, ragged breath filled his lungs. Then another. Color began to return to his face. Slowly, painfully, his eyelids fluttered open, revealing a pair of cold, gray-blue eyes, the kind of eyes that had stared down killers, senators, and enemies of the state. But now, those eyes blinked up at a tiny face streaked with tears. "Who are you?" he rasped, his voice barely a whisper. Lily sniffled, clutching the inhaler against her chest. "I'm Lily," she whispered. "I thought you were dead, mister." In that single, impossible moment, Lucas Moretti, the most feared Mafia boss in New York, realized that the little girl kneeling before him had just pulled him back from the grave. To understand how one small act of kindness would shake the entire underworld of New York to its foundations, we must turn back the clock 3 years, to the night that broke him. 3 years before that trembling little hand pressed an inhaler to his lips. Lucas Moretti was not a man who collapsed in hallways. He was the man other men collapsed in front of. The Moretti family had ruled the East Coast underworld for nearly a century. From the docks of Brooklyn to the warehouses of New Jersey, their name was stitched into every shadow of the city. Lucas's grandfather built the empire with iron and blood. His father expanded it with cruelty that became the stuff of legend. And when Lucas inherited the throne at 32, the old captains expected him to follow the same ruthless path. But Lucas was different. He had read books his father had never touched. He had studied law, finance, business, and above all, he had fallen in love with a woman who saw something in him that no one else did. Her name was Isabella. She was a piano teacher from Queens, with soft brown curls and a laugh that sounded like the first chord of a forgotten song. They met by accident at a charity gala, where she had been hired to play. Lucas, standing in the back of the ballroom in his black tuxedo, watched her fingers dance across the keys, and forgot, for the first time in his life, what empire he was supposed to inherit. She did not know who he was, and that was exactly why he loved her. They married quietly, and a year later, their son Daniel arrived, a bright-eyed little boy who tugged at his father's silk ties with chocolate-smeared fingers. For the first time, the Moretti mansion was filled with music. Isabella played Debussy in the sunroom every morning. Daniel laughed as he chased imaginary dragons through the marble halls. And Lucas, the fearsome heir to a blood-stained legacy, often sat on the floor building Lego towers with his 5-year-old son. One quiet evening, with Daniel asleep on his chest, Lucas had whispered to his wife across the couch, "I'm going to wash my hands of this life, Bella. I mean it. Real estate, restaurants, something clean. I want a normal life for him." Isabella had smiled, that soft, unshakable smile. "I don't need normal, Lucas. I just need you to come home every night." But fate, it seemed, had been taking notes. It happened on a rainy night in March. Lucas was in his study when Victor Romano, his most trusted lieutenant, the man he called brother, burst through the door with panic in his voice. "Boss, the Jersey warehouse is under attack. You need to come. Now." Lucas kissed Isabella on the forehead. He kissed Daniel's small sleeping head. He promised he would be back by breakfast. Isabella was supposed to drive Daniel to her mother's house that same night, following a schedule she had kept for months. At 11:47 p.m., Lucas's phone rang again. A different voice this time. Strangled. Broken. A Brooklyn bridge. An explosion. A black sedan twisted in flames. Lucas drove through the rain like a man already dead. When he reached the bridge, he fell to his knees in the ash and the rain, and screamed a sound no human being should ever have to make. The police ruled it an accident. A fuel line rupture. A freak tragedy. Lucas did not believe them. He hired private investigators. He tore apart every lead. Victor stood beside him through it all, pouring him whiskey at 3 a.m, swearing on his own life that they would find the truth. They never did. From that night on, music was forbidden in the Moretti mansion. Laughter was forbidden. Every photograph of Isabella and Daniel was taken down and locked away. Lucas became exactly what his father had always wanted him to become: cold, merciless, untouchable. And 3 years later, on a quiet afternoon, he stood at his study window holding a glass of whiskey, staring out at nothing at all, his gray-blue eyes as empty as the grave. He did not know that downstairs, a little girl with 2 braids and a pink pajama shirt had just arrived through the servant's entrance. While Lucas stood at that mansion window with a glass of whiskey in his hand, 40 miles away in the South Bronx, another kind of silence filled a very different room. Hannah Carter sat at a rickety kitchen table under a single yellow bulb, counting the crumpled bills in her purse for the 3rd time that night. $27, $240 owed to the landlord, $95 overdue on the electric bill, a hospital collection notice with red ink along the edges that she no longer had the courage to open. She was 28 years old. Once, she had been a pediatric nurse at Mount Sinai, with a husband named David, a small apartment in Harlem, and a little girl who filled every corner of their lives with laughter. Then came the diagnosis: pancreatic cancer, stage 4, 18 months of chemotherapy, 18 months of selling everything they owned, their car, her wedding ring, even David's old guitar, just to keep him breathing a little longer. He died on a Tuesday morning, holding her hand, apologizing for something that was never his fault. 2 years later, she and her daughter were living in a damp basement apartment in the Bronx, where black mold climbed the bathroom walls like a slow disease. Lily's little lungs could not handle it. The coughing fits came almost every night. Hannah sat beside her bed and pressed the inhaler to her tiny lips, counting to 3, whispering the same words her mother had once whispered to her. "Breathe slowly, baby. The air will come back." That was the week the letter arrived. An engraved envelope, cream-colored, heavy as a secret. A private domestic staffing agency based in Manhattan had been given her name by an old colleague at the hospital. A private family on Long Island was looking for a discreet housekeeper. Salary, 4 times the going rate. Conditions, a strict non-disclosure agreement, and no questions asked. Hannah called the number the next morning. The interview took place in a small, oak-paneled office overlooking the East River. An older woman with silver hair pulled into a perfect bun introduced herself as Rosa, the head of house at the Moretti estate. Her eyes were kind but tired, the eyes of someone who had seen too much. "The master of the house," Rosa said carefully, "is a very particular man. Once you cross that gate, there are things you will see and not speak of. Are you certain you want this position, Mrs. Carter?" Hannah thought of her daughter's medical bills. She thought of the landlord's eviction notice on the door. "I'll do anything," she said. "Whatever it takes." 3 days later, she drove her rusted Honda Civic through the wrought iron gates of the Moretti estate and felt the air itself change around her. The walls were 10 feet high. Cameras tracked her from every angle. Men in black suits with earpieces nodded as she passed, their hands resting too casually near their jackets. Inside, the mansion was a cathedral of silence. Red carpet stretched down endless hallways. Crystal chandeliers hung from painted ceilings. Rosa walked briskly beside her, listing the rules like a prayer. The third floor is private. You will never go there. The piano room stays locked. You will never touch it. You will not speak of the family. Ever. Do you understand? Hannah nodded, her throat dry. She was introduced to Marco, the head of security. A broad-shouldered man with a hard jaw and eyes that, surprisingly, looked at her with something close to warmth. She was introduced to Victor Romano, the master's right hand, a man in a tailored charcoal suit who smiled at her with perfect teeth. "Welcome to the Moretti family, Mrs. Carter," Victor said smoothly, his voice like honey poured over a knife. "Good luck to you." Something in her spine went cold. It was at the end of that first day, as she was collecting her coat, that she saw him for the first time. A tall man in a black suit walked past her down the hallway, his steps slow and heavy. He did not look at her. His gray-blue eyes stared straight ahead, emptier than any eyes she had ever seen in her nursing years, even emptier than the eyes of the dying. What happened to this man? She thought. That night, she held Lily against her chest on their thin mattress, kissed her braided hair, and had no way of knowing that the very walls of the Moretti mansion were already waiting for her daughter. 3 weeks passed. 3 weeks of early mornings, late nights, and polished silver. Hannah learned the rhythm of the Moretti mansion the way a musician learns a difficult score. By listening, by watching, by never missing a beat. She learned that Rosa took her tea at exactly 9 in the morning, that the cook, Bennett, hated onions but insisted on dicing them himself, that Marco always tipped his head in a silent greeting when she passed him in the corridor, a gesture small enough to go unnoticed by anyone else but warm enough for her to feel seen. She scrubbed the marble floors until they gleamed. She folded linens with the precision of a nurse making a hospital bed, and she never, not once, asked a single question. Rosa noticed. One evening, as Hannah was leaving through the servants' entrance, the old housekeeper caught her arm gently. "You do good work, dear," Rosa said quietly. "Better than most. Keep your head down, and you will be safe here." It was the kindest thing anyone had said to her in 2 years. Hannah nearly cried on the drive home. Then came Friday. Lily woke up at 5 in the morning, with her little body burning. Her fever had spiked to 103. Her chest rattled with every breath, and the inhaler was only half helping. Hannah pressed a cold washcloth to her daughter's forehead, her nursing instincts warring with her terrified heart. She called every sitter on her list. The elderly Mrs. Jenkins across the hall was visiting her son in Baltimore. Maria from upstairs was working a double at the diner. Her own mother lived in a retirement community outside Dallas, 1,500 miles away. There was no one at all. Missing a shift meant termination. Rosa had said so on the first day, kindly but firmly, and termination meant eviction. Eviction meant the streets. Hannah stood over her feverish daughter and felt the walls of her life closing in. She knelt beside Lily's bed and brushed the damp braids from her forehead. "Baby," she whispered, "Mama has a crazy idea." By 7:30, Hannah had packed a small backpack, Tylenol, the inhaler, a thermos of warm broth, 2 coloring books, a box of crayons, a worn stuffed rabbit named Mr. Biscuit, and the softest blanket they owned. She dressed Lily in her pink pajamas and a small winter coat, then lifted her gently into the passenger seat of the old Honda. She drove through the back service gate of the Moretti estate and parked in the staff lot, her heart hammering against her ribs. Holding Lily's small hand, she slipped through the side corridors, avoiding the cameras she had memorized during her first week, down the back staircase, past the wine cellar, to a forgotten storage room in the far corner of the basement, a place where cobwebs hung from the light fixtures and no one had stepped foot in years. Hannah laid an old mattress on the floor, covered it with the blanket, and helped Lily settle in. She knelt down and took her daughter's small face in both hands. "Lily, listen to Mama. This is a very dangerous place. You cannot come out of this room, no matter what you hear. Do you understand me?" Lily nodded solemnly, her big brown eyes serious. "I'll be a good girl. I promise, Mama. If someone opens the door, you hide under the blanket. If I am not back by 6, you stay right here. Don't move. Don't make a sound." Lily's small brow furrowed. "But Mama, what if somebody gets sick? Like me?" Hannah paused. The question caught her off guard. She kissed her daughter's forehead and swallowed the lump in her throat. "You just take care of yourself today, my little angel. That's all." She closed the door and locked it with the spare key she had copied from Rosa's ring weeks earlier, just in case. Her footsteps felt heavier than they had ever felt before as she walked back up the stairs. Inside the storage room, Lily opened her coloring book. She flipped to a blank page and began to draw, her crayon moving in slow, careful strokes. A house, a mother, a little girl with braids, and for reasons she did not understand, a tall man in a dark suit standing beside them. She was still humming softly to herself, coloring his eyes a soft gray blue, when a loud, hurried sound came from the floor above. Heavy footsteps, a dropped phone, then a thud that shook the ceiling. Lily froze, her crayon suspended in midair. Something was wrong upstairs. The heavy thud that shook the ceiling above Lily's storage room had, only seconds earlier, been the body of Lucas Moretti hitting the marble floor of the second-story hallway. Lucas had just returned from a tense sit-down in Little Italy, 3 hours across a long oak table with the heads of 2 rival families, discussing territory, debts, and the alarming rumors that a Russian syndicate led by a man named Dmitry Volkov had been creeping into the Brooklyn docks. Men he had trusted for a decade had looked at him with uneasy eyes. Something was shifting in the underworld, and he could feel it in his bones. He stormed through the front doors of the mansion with his tie loosened and his phone pressed hard against his ear. "I don't care how you do it," he snarled. "Find him, kill him, and bring me his damn wallet as proof. Are we clear?" He ended the call without waiting for an answer. His driver had left his briefcase in the car. Inside that briefcase were his prescription inhaler and his emergency pill bottle. Lucas had suffered from asthma since he was a boy, a weakness so private that only 2 men in the world knew about it. Marco, who had once pulled him out of a collapsed building in Sicily, and Victor, who had grown up with him. He did not go back for the briefcase. He never did. Not when his mind was burning like this. He was halfway up the grand staircase when the first cough came. A small one, a tickle. He brushed it off as exhaustion. By the time he reached the top of the second-floor landing, the second cough hit him harder, doubling him over for a breath. A prickle of cold sweat broke across the back of his neck. He kept walking. He had survived worse than a tight chest. But by the time he reached the middle of the long, red-carpeted hallway, his lungs had sealed themselves shut. Air scraped in like broken glass. His vision swam. He reached for his phone, fumbling, and the device slipped from his fingers and clattered somewhere on the marble. "Mar-co," he rasped, but the word never left his throat. His knees gave out. His shoulder struck the wall, and then the tall, untouchable king of the Moretti Empire fell forward onto the carpet with a dull, echoing thud. Downstairs in the storage room, Lily sat frozen with her crayon in midair. She remembered her mother's voice. "Stay here. Don't move, no matter what." But another memory pushed through. The night, months ago, when her own mother had fainted in the kitchen from exhaustion, and little Lily had dialed 911 with shaking fingers. What if no one up there knew someone had fallen? Her small heart made up its mind before her head did. She tucked the inhaler into the pocket of her pink pajamas, opened the door, and padded up the back staircase on bare feet, quiet as a small gray kitten. She had memorized this part of the mansion from her mother's whispered descriptions at bedtime. At the top of the stairs, she peeked around the corner. The second-floor hallway stretched silent and enormous before her, lined with paintings she did not understand. And in the middle of that endless red carpet lay a man, face down, one hand clawed tight against his chest. She should have been afraid. Any other 6-year-old would have run. But Lily felt something else instead. A strange, soft ache in her own small chest, like recognizing a wounded bird. "Mister," she whispered, stepping closer on her tiny feet. "Mister, are you sick like me too?" No answer. She knelt beside him, pulled the inhaler from her pocket, and did what her mother had taught her. 1 press. Nothing. 2 presses. Still nothing. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she whispered, "Please don't die, mister." On the 3rd press, his chest rose. His eyes fluttered open, gray-blue and bewildered, and rested on the small, tear-stained face hovering above him. He rasped the only word he could form. "Who are you?" "I'm Lily," she sniffled. "I thought you were dead." At that precise moment, 2 floors below, Hannah froze in the pantry. She had heard the thud. She had heard voices. A small voice. A child's voice. Lily's voice. She dropped the silver tray she was holding and ran. She took the back stairs 2 at a time, her apron flying, her lungs burning. She rounded the corner of the second-floor landing and saw something that stopped her heart cold. Her 6-year-old daughter, kneeling on the carpet. Beside her, the master of the house, sprawled on the floor, slowly lifting his head. Hannah's knees buckled beneath her. Oh, dear God. Hannah's knees had barely touched the marble when 2 sets of footsteps came pounding from opposite ends of the hallway. Marco came first, his radio still crackling at his hip, his hand already inside his jacket. A half-second later, Victor Romano rounded the far corner, his face flushed with the alarm of a man who had just heard his boss collapse over a security monitor. The sight that met them both stopped them mid-step. Lucas Moretti, the most feared man on the East Coast, was slumped against the wall of his own hallway, still gasping for breath. A trembling housekeeper was on her knees on the red carpet, and between them, holding a pink plastic inhaler in her tiny fist, stood a 6-year-old black girl in pajamas. Victor reacted first. His handgun came out of its holster in a single practiced motion, the muzzle rising toward Hannah. "Who the hell brought that child into this house?" he roared. Hannah flung her body forward, wrapping her arms around Lily, shielding her daughter with her own shoulders. Please don't hurt her. She's my daughter." "I'm so sorry, Mr. Moretti, please." "I beg you!" Marco moved faster than she expected. His hand clamped onto Victor's wrist, pressing the weapon down toward the floor. "Not your call," Marco said quietly. "Let the boss decide." A heavy silence fell. Lucas dragged himself up into a sitting position, his back against the wall, one hand still pressed against his chest. His lungs burned, but he could breathe now. He could think. His gray-blue eyes, still glassy from oxygen starvation, focused slowly on the small figure in front of him. Lily stared back at him, her lip trembling, but she did not run. She was afraid of him. Yes, he could see that, but she was also, impossibly, afraid for him. She took a tiny step closer, ignoring her mother's panicked grip on her shirt. "Mister, are you feeling better now?" Hannah tried to pull her back, but Lucas raised a slow, exhausted hand. "Let her." His voice was still hoarse, but the command in it was absolute. Hannah froze. Lucas looked down at the child standing in front of him. "How old are you, Lily?" 6, she answered, holding up 6 small fingers just to be certain he understood. "I have asthma too, mister. My mama taught me how to use this." She extended the little inhaler toward him with both hands, as if offering a priceless treasure. It was smaller than his own, a child's dose. Lucas stared at the inhaler, then at her face, her 2 uneven braids, her serious, tear-streaked eyes, something in the frozen chamber of his chest, something that had been sealed shut for 3 years, cracked open just a fraction of an inch. He turned his head slowly toward Victor. "Put the gun away." Victor did not move. "Sir, with respect, this woman smuggled an unauthorized person into the house. Our protocols are clear." "She has to be," I said. Lucas repeated, his voice sharpening into the cold steel the entire underworld recognized. "Put the gun away." Victor's jaw flexed. Slowly, reluctantly, he slid the weapon back into its holster. His eyes flicked briefly toward Hannah, and something in that glance made her stomach turn to ice. "Help me up, Marco." Marco stepped forward and lifted his boss carefully to his feet. Lucas straightened his jacket, regaining his composure like a man slipping back into armor. Then he turned those gray-blue eyes on Hannah, still kneeling on the carpet. "What is your name?" "Hannah Carter, sir," she stammered. "I didn't have anyone to watch her. She woke up with a fever. I didn't have a choice. I swear to you. I didn't." He let her run out of breath. "Stand up, Mrs. Carter." She blinked at him, tears still running down her cheeks, uncertain if she had heard him correctly. "Your daughter," Lucas said, more quietly, "just saved my life. I am not an ungrateful man." Lily peeked up from behind her mother's arm, her little voice barely a whisper. "So, you're not going to fire my mama?" For the first time in 3 years, the left corner of Lucas Moretti's mouth pulled upward, not quite a smile, something smaller, rustier, but real. He bent down until he was nearly at her eye level. "No. And Lily, would you like to stay here?" Lily looked back at her mother, then at him, then at her inhaler. "You mean, live here? I get scared at home all by myself." Lucas straightened and turned to Hannah. "There is a suite of rooms in the East Wing that has been empty for 3 years. I want the 2 of you moved into it by tonight." Hannah opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Lucas turned to the butler already approaching down the hall. "Rosa, prepare the East Wing." Rosa's eyes widened for only a heartbeat before she bowed her head. "Right away, sir." Behind them all, unnoticed in the shadow of a marble column, Victor Romano stood perfectly still, his hand, hidden inside his jacket pocket, curled slowly into a fist so tight his knuckles turned white. His eyes, fixed on the little girl with the inhaler, had gone as dark as a grave. Long after the East Wing lights had dimmed and the mansion settled into uneasy quiet, Victor Romano stood alone in the library on the first floor. He poured himself a glass of single malt scotch, 2 fingers, neat. The crystal caught the firelight. He did not drink right away. He stood at the tall bay window, staring out at the east wing of the mansion, where a single warm lamp glowed behind a pair of white curtains. The room where Hannah Carter and her daughter were now sleeping peacefully under Lucas Moretti's protection. The warm, brotherly smile Victor wore by day was gone. What remained was something altogether different, something cold, something ancient, and something very, very patient, because Victor Romano had not been born Victor Romano at all. 40 years earlier, on a cold January night in Queens, a 5-year-old boy named Vincenzo Falcone had hidden inside a hallway closet, while 3 men in long coats dragged his father, Salvatore Falcone, into the kitchen. Salvatore had been a small-time capo, proud, stubborn, and foolish enough to challenge the reigning patriarch of the Moretti family, Antonio Moretti, Lucas's grandfather. The Morettis did not tolerate challenges. Through the slats of the closet door, little Vincenzo watched his father beg on his knees. He watched the pistol rise. He watched the spray of red bloom across the yellow kitchen wallpaper his mother had picked out only 2 months before. His mother, Margarita, came home an hour later and found her husband that way. 3 days later, she was committed to a state hospital. 2 weeks after that, she hanged herself with a bedsheet in the ward bathroom. Vincenzo was sent to a Catholic orphanage in upstate New York. He did not cry at his parents' funeral. That same night, long after the East Wing had been opened and freshly made, beds had been prepared for Hannah and Lily, long after Rosa had finished unfolding linens that had not seen sunlight in 3 years. Victor Romano stood alone in the mansion library with the door locked behind him. The warm, brotherly smile he had worn for 15 years was gone. What remained on his face, illuminated by a single green banker's lamp, was something far older and far colder. He poured himself a glass of aged Italian brandy from a crystal decanter and drank half of it in one pull. His hand, which had never trembled in front of Lucas, trembled now, because the little girl had almost ruined everything. His mind drifted back, as it often did when he was alone, to a summer night 40 years ago in a small row house in Bay Ridge. He had been 5 years old. His name had been Vincenzo Falcone. His father had been a minor capo who had made one terrible mistake. He had dared to stand up to old Don Alessandro Moretti, Lucas's grandfather, over a disputed strip of dockyard. That spring, 4 men in long coats had come to the Falcone family home in the middle of dinner. Little Vincenzo had hidden behind the kitchen curtain and watched his father take 3 bullets to the chest across a plate of his mother's lasagna. He had watched his mother scream until the sound no longer seemed human. 3 weeks later, she walked into the Hudson River with stones in her coat pockets and never walked out. 5-year-old Vincenzo was placed in a Catholic orphanage on Staten Island, where he learned to kneel, to pray, to say yes, sister, and to carve a single promise into the soft meat of his own heart. One day, I will burn the Moretti family to the ground. By 20, he had changed his name to Victor Romano, a convenient identity borrowed from a dead cousin of a Moretti ally. By 25, he had inserted himself into the lower ranks of the family as a grieving orphan of a loyal soldier. By 30, he was Lucas's closest friend. By 35, his right hand. 15 years of smiles, 15 years of Christmas dinners, 15 years of patience so deep it could rot a man from the inside. 3 years ago, he had taken his greatest bite. He remembered the rain on the Brooklyn Bridge. He remembered the small magnetic device he had personally bolted under the floor of Isabella Moretti's Mercedes the afternoon before. A controlled burn, nothing messy, nothing that would attract federal attention. And afterward, he had held Lucas in the rain and sworn on his mother's soul that they would find whoever did this. He had poured the whiskey at 3 a.m. He had been, by every visible measure, the best friend the widowed boss had ever had. And then today, after 3 years of watching Lucas rot beautifully from grief, a 6-year-old with an asthma inhaler had pried open the coffin. He drained the rest of his glass. His burner phone vibrated against the leather desk. He already knew who it was. Vince. The voice on the other end was low, accented, unhurried. Dmitry Volkov. How are we progressing? There is a complication, Victor said softly. A child and her mother. The boss has taken an interest in them. There was a long pause. I have no use for complications, Dmitry said. Next week, my men move on the South Brooklyn ports. If Moretti is alert, if he is awake, I will lose soldiers. That cannot happen. Handle it, Vince, or I will send someone who can. Victor poured himself another glass and watched the amber swirl against the lamp. Don't worry, old friend, he said, and his lips curled into a smile no human being should ever be allowed to wear. I have something special planned for the mother and the child. They won't be a problem much longer. He ended the call and walked to the tall window overlooking the courtyard. Across the darkened lawn, Two warm golden lights glowed in the east wing, the first lights to burn in that part of the mansion since Isabella Moretti had died. Victor raised his glass slowly, as if in a toast. "Sleep well, Mrs. Carter," he whispered to the window. "Sleep well, little angel." And he smiled until his teeth showed. Lily Carter had always been a watcher. Even as a toddler in the Bronx, while other children her age chased pigeons and rolled on playground mats, Lily had preferred to sit very still in corners and simply observe. Hannah had worried about it once. She had taken her daughter to a pediatric specialist who, after 2 long sessions, had smiled and handed back the same verdict her mother already suspected. "Your daughter isn't withdrawn, Mrs. Carter. She's studying the world. Some children collect stickers. This one collects faces." Lily could remember conversations she had overheard weeks earlier, word for word. She could tell when the mailman was tired just by the way his shoulders moved. And now, in the Moretti mansion, her quiet little eyes had begun to collect a very specific face, Victor Romano's. He was the only person in the entire house who made her skin feel too tight for her body. He smiled at her with perfect white teeth, and something behind those teeth made her want to step backwards. The first odd thing she saw happened on a Tuesday morning. She had been lying on the kitchen floor making friends with the cook's black and white cat, a round little creature named Biscuit. Victor had walked past the kitchen without noticing her, carrying his phone, and slipped into the library. Lily padded after him in her socks and tucked herself behind the tall oak bookcase by the door. Victor was speaking in a language she had never heard before. Harsh, clipped syllables that sounded like rocks being kicked down a staircase. She did not understand a word, but she noticed how his voice tightened when he said one name over and over. Dmitri, Dmitri, Dmitri. The second odd thing happened 4 days later. Lucas had flown to Boston for a meeting. Lily was in the hallway outside his study looking for her coloring book when she saw Victor slip inside with a small key in his hand. Through the gap of the door, she watched him unlock the second drawer of Lucas's desk, pull out a thick folder, and carefully photograph each page with his phone. Then he put the folder back exactly where he had found it, brushed the drawer clean with the corner of his sleeve, and walked out whistling softly. That night, Lily tugged her mother's apron in the laundry room. "Mama, I saw Mr. Victor taking pictures of Mr. Lucas's papers." Hannah smiled tiredly and kissed the top of her head. "Sweetheart, Mr. Victor is Mr. Lucas's right hand. He's allowed to do things like that. Please don't sneak around grown-ups, okay?" Lily did not argue, but she did not stop watching. 4 nights later, tiptoeing to the bathroom past midnight, she caught him standing alone on the second-floor balcony, sketching a floor plan into a small leather notebook, a floor plan with bedrooms marked in tight pencil strokes. Lily pressed her back flat against the wall and let her photographic little mind swallow the shape of it whole. The next morning, Lucas was drinking coffee alone in the sunroom when a small figure in a yellow dress climbed up into the chair beside him. "Mr. Lucas," she whispered. "Can I ask you something?" He set his cup down. "Anything, little angel. Is Mr. Victor a good man?" Lucas's eyebrow lifted. "Why do you ask?" Lily swung her legs thoughtfully. "Because he has 2 faces. When he looks at you, he's warm. When he turns around, he's like a wolf." For a long moment, Lucas did not answer. He studied the small, serious face beside him, the dark eyes that had pulled him out of death 5 weeks earlier, and he felt something shift in his ribs. "Your eyes are very sharp, Lily," he said softly, "but Victor has been my friend for a long time. I trust him." She nodded like a child who had been told not to worry about the monster under the bed. She did not press further, but the seed had already been planted. That night, Lucas sat alone in his study and found himself replaying the last 2 years of his life. Victor, arriving late to the sit-down in Little Italy with no explanation. Victor stepping outside onto the balcony whenever his phone rang. Victor insisting, 3 years ago, on personally handling the investigation into Isabella's crash. He picked up the intercom and called Marco. "I need you to shadow Victor, quietly. His movements, his calls, his bank activity. Off the books. No one else is to know." Marco was silent for a beat too long. "Boss, are you sure? 15 years? He's been with you. That is exactly why I have to be sure," Lucas said. "If I'm wrong, nobody ever hears a word. If I'm right..." He did not finish the sentence. Marco did not need him to. "Understood, sir." 2 floors above, Victor Romano was straightening his tie in front of a mirror when his eyes, trained over decades of hunting and being hunted, caught something in his own reflection that had not been there before. The memory of how Lucas had looked at him across the dinner table that evening. A half-second too long. A flicker of cold. He stopped smoothing his tie. He knew. suddenly and with absolute clarity, that the boss was watching him. 2 weeks passed, while Marco quietly followed Victor's shadow through the streets of New York. Something far softer was happening inside the walls of the Moretti mansion. Lucas, who had not come home before midnight in 3 years, began returning at 7. Then 6. Then 5:30. Rosa, who had worked in that house for most of her adult life, watched him walk through the front door one Tuesday evening with a paper bag of pastries from a bakery in Brooklyn, and had to turn away to hide her tears. He stopped eating in the grand dining hall. Instead, he moved the 3 of them into the small breakfast nook at the back of the kitchen, the one with the crooked window that overlooked the rose garden. Lily would climb into her chair and launch, without invitation, into long, winding stories about her old school, about a boy named Terrence who ate glue, about the pigeon she had once tried to name Gregory. Hannah, at first, sat stiffly, afraid her daughter was talking too much, afraid Lucas would tire of it. But Lucas never did. He listened with a patience she did not know a man of his reputation could possess, asking small, serious questions, as if the fate of the world depended on whether Gregory the pigeon had found his way home. Something began to thaw. Then came the night of the attack. It was nearly 2 in the morning when Hannah bolted upright in bed to the sound of her daughter's broken wheezing from the next room. Lily was sitting up in her bed, clutching her small chest, her lips already tinting blue. Hannah tore through the nightstand drawer looking for the inhaler that had somehow, terribly, been left downstairs. She was running for the door when Lucas appeared in it. He had heard Lily crying from 2 corridors away. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, scooped the little girl into his arms with practiced ease, his own emergency inhaler, the adult one he always kept in his jacket pocket now, to her small lips. He counted to 3 out loud, the way her mother did. "Breathe slowly, sweetheart. The air will come back. That's a good girl. That's my good girl." Lily's breathing eased. Her eyes fluttered. She wrapped one tiny hand around his lapel and sank into his chest as if she had known him her entire life. Within minutes, she was asleep against his shoulder, her mouth curved into a faint, tired smile. Lucas tucked her into the pillows with a tenderness Hannah had not seen on a man's face since her husband had died. He smoothed her braids. He pulled the blanket up to her chin. Standing together in the hallway outside Lily's room a few minutes later, Hannah tried to speak and found that she had no words. I don't know how to thank you." "Don't thank me," Lucas said quietly. "She saved me first." "I don't mean the asthma," Hannah whispered. "I mean you're saving us. Both of us. From the life we were living before." Lucas looked at her then, truly looked at her, not as the housekeeper, not as the mother of the child who had pulled him back from death, as a woman. "Maybe the 2 of you are saving me too." They did not go back to bed that night. They sat in the small conservatory at the end of the east wing, sharing a pot of tea Rosa had left warm on the stove. Hannah told him about David, about how they had met in 11th grade chemistry, how they had gotten married at City Hall at 22 with $47 between them, how she had held his hand in a hospice in Queens while cancer ate away everything he had ever been. Lucas told her about Isabella, about the charity gala, about the piano she played in the sunroom every morning, about the promise he had made to leave this life behind, a promise he had been an hour too late to keep. 2 people carrying the same weight from opposite sides of the world, finally setting it down at the same table. "I thought I would never feel anything again," Lucas said quietly, looking out the tall window at the stars, as if my heart had been buried with them. "I understand that feeling," Hannah said, "but Lily pulled me back, and I think she's doing the same to you." They sat in silence for a long time, watching the sky. "There is a piece," Lucas murmured, "that Isabella used to play every morning. I haven't let myself hear it in 3 years. Hannah reached across the small table and gently laid her hand on top of his. "Maybe it's time you did." The next afternoon, Lucas unlocked the piano room for the first time since the night of the Brooklyn Bridge. Lily walked in first. She approached the grand piano with the reverence of a small pilgrim and climbed onto the bench. She did not know how to play, but her tiny fingers pressed one white key, then another, drawing random soft notes into the quiet air. Lucas stood in the doorway. Tears slid silently down his cheek. Hannah stepped beside him and slipped her hand into his. He squeezed back, tight. And in that room where music had been dead for 3 years, a 6-year-old girl with asthma was quietly, accidentally, beginning to bring it back to life. From the window of his own quarters on the 3rd floor, Victor Romano had heard those random piano notes drift through the mansion. He heard a housekeeper's teacup clink against a saucer at 2 a.m. He heard a little girl laugh at breakfast in a room that had been silent for 3 years. and every sound, every small warm note, drove a colder spike into his chest. Then, on a Thursday evening, he passed the door of Lucas's study and heard the low voice of Marco speaking inside. Only fragments reached him before he forced himself to keep walking. Bank activity in Zurich. Second phone. Meetings in Brighton Beach. Victor did not slow his stride. He did not even turn his head. But by the time he reached his own door, he knew with the certainty of a man who had spent 40 years waiting for this single betrayal to be discovered that the clock had just run out. He could not kill the little girl with a knife. He could not stage a break-in. He needed something clean, something that would look exactly like what had killed Isabella Moretti 3 years ago. A tragic, unexplainable accident. He made one phone call to a private botanist in Queens. The next morning, a small brown envelope was left inside a dead drop behind a dry cleaner on Fulton Street. Inside was a tiny glass vial of a rare plant derivative called abrin, one of the most lethal compounds on the planet, undetectable in standard toxicology panels, and perfectly mimicking the symptoms of food poisoning. That evening, Victor exercised a privilege no one else in the mansion had. As the senior operational officer of the household, he could shut down interior cameras for short maintenance windows. He selected a 15-minute slot while the cook was on his break. He slipped into the kitchen with gloved hands, found the little glass bottle of warm milk Rosa always prepared for Lily before bed, and tipped 3 precise drops into it. He recapped the bottle, wiped it clean, placed it back exactly where it had been, and walked out whistling. Upstairs, Lily was already in her pajamas, brushing the hair of her stuffed rabbit, when there was a soft knock on her door. Lucas stepped in holding a small white paper box tied with string. "I brought you cookies from the meeting today," he said. "Would you like one?" Lily's entire face lit up like a lantern. "Yes, please." She sat cross-legged on her bed and ate 2 sugar cookies in quick, happy bites. Lucas kissed the top of her head, something he had started doing without deciding to, and wished her good night. She did not touch the milk. Half an hour later, Hannah came in to tidy up. She saw the full glass bottle on the nightstand, sighed at her daughter's tired little snore, and poured them up down the kitchen drain before loading the bottle into the sink. A few drops splattered onto the tile floor. Biscuit, the round black and white kitchen cat, patted in and licked them up. At 3 in the morning, Rosa found Biscuit in front of the pantry, stiff, his small body already cold, white foam around his mouth. Her cry pulled Hannah down the back stairs barefoot. The 2 women stood there, weeping over the little animal like he had been their own child. Lily, when she was told in the morning, cried for hours. She had made friends with only one creature in this enormous new home, and now he was gone. Lucas took one look at the cat's body and went absolutely, dangerously still. By noon, he had a private veterinary toxicology lab running emergency tests. The result came back that same evening, delivered to him on a single unmarked page. Abrin, plant-derived, military grade, virtually inaccessible through ordinary channels. He set the page down on his desk with a hand that did not tremble, but only because he refused to let it. Somebody in his own house had tried to poison the little girl who had saved his life. He called every member of staff into the front hall that evening. Victor stood at his left shoulder, his face a perfect mask of outrage. "Whoever did this," Victor hissed in front of everyone, "must be a planted man. This has Volkov written all over it. We will find him, sir." "We will." Lucas did not answer. He simply looked at Victor for 3 long seconds, and those 3 seconds were the longest of Victor Romano's entire life. Later, in the private study, Marco closed the door behind him. "The kitchen cameras were offline for 15 minutes last night," Marco said quietly. "Only 2 people in this house can authorize that window. You, sir, and him." Lucas's knuckles whitened on the edge of his desk. "I need more than that. Harder evidence. Don't spook him." "Yes, sir. But we have to protect the mother and the child. Now, from this moment on," Lucas said, "you do not leave their side. You sleep outside her door if you have to." That night, Lucas sat in the dim glow of a bedside lamp beside the sleeping Lily and held her small hand in his own. "I promise you," he whispered to her, "no one is ever going to hurt you. Not ever." Hannah was watching from the doorway, her hand pressed over her mouth. She had realized, somewhere between the cat and this moment, that she was falling in love with the most dangerous man in New York, and that realization terrified her almost as much as it gave her hope. Down in the rose garden, Victor Romano stood alone in the cold, looking up at the single yellow light still burning in Lily's bedroom window. The cookies, the damned cookies. His plan had failed, which meant he would have to escalate, and this time, he would not use a bottle of milk. For the next 5 days, while Victor Romano walked through the Moretti mansion smiling his brotherly smile, Marco became a ghost. He tailed Victor's driver. He cloned the metadata off one of Victor's burner phones at a dead drop. He pulled favors from an old friend in financial forensics at the Manhattan DA's office. And slowly, the picture began to assemble itself like a puzzle soaked in blood. Victor Romano owned 4 hidden shell corporations, 2 in the Cayman Islands, 2 in Zurich. The combined balances in those accounts added up to $18 million, none of it accountable on a salaried consigliere's legitimate income. Every quarter for the past 3 years, the deposits had arrived from a fund structured through a shipping firm based in Bratislava. The shipping firm, when Marco pulled the registrations, was a laundering front for Dmitry Volkov's Brooklyn operation. Then came the calendar entries. Marco found them buried in Victor's cloned email drafts. Lunch with D, Brighton Beach, meeting 9 p.m., Coney Warehouse, check-in, Zurich. 3 years of coded appointments, all aligning with nights Victor had told Lucas he was visiting his aging aunt in New Jersey. But the most devastating discovery came on the 4th night, in a truck stop motel outside Trenton. Marco had chased down a name whispered to him by an old soldier, Eddie Kowalski, a low-level bomb technician who had officially died in a boating accident 2.5 years ago. Only he had not died. He had seen Victor's men coming for him the night after the job on the Brooklyn Bridge, and he had taken his wife and run to the Poconos with $40,000 in cash. Marco found him behind a diner counter, serving eggs under a fake name. The man broke within minutes. On the 5th night, Marco drove Lucas to a safe house in a warehouse district in Long Island City. Inside, under a single hanging bulb, Eddie Kowalski sat in a folding chair with shaking hands. "I took the job from Romano," Kowalski said, staring at the floor. "He paid me $12,000 cash. He said it was a GPS tracker. He told me he needed to know where your wife was driving after hours, because he thought she was meeting another man. I swear on my own kids, sir. I swear to God. I didn't know it was a bomb. I didn't know until I saw the news the next morning." Lucas did not move. He did not blink. For a long, long time, he simply stared at the concrete floor, while every cell in his body understood what every cell in his body had always half suspected. 3 years. 3 years of Victor pouring him whiskey. 3 years of Victor holding his shoulders at the cemetery. 3 years of the man he had called brother watching him rot, sipping the grief like wine. Lucas rose from his chair, slowly, and walked toward the door. "Boss." Marco stepped in front of him. "Sir." "No. Get out of my way. Sir, if you walk into that house tonight and put a bullet in him, Volkov gets the signal within an hour. We lose the element of surprise. We lose the chance to end this all the way. Isabella and Daniel deserve more than a clean shot in a hallway. You know that." The most terrible moment of Lucas Moretti's life was not the Brooklyn Bridge. It was standing in that warehouse, fists shaking, forcing himself to nod. When he walked back through the mansion doors 2 hours later, his face wore a smile that had been carefully tailored on the drive home. Victor was waiting for him in the foyer with a glass of scotch. "Boss, everything all right?" "Everything's fine, Vince," Lucas said, accepting the glass. "Thank you." Inside, he wanted to tear the man's throat out with his teeth. Over the next 72 hours, Lucas moved pieces no one in the house saw. He met privately with the heads of the 3 allied Italian families who still owed him blood debts, and he laid out the plan for a coordinated strike against Volkov's operation. Then he did something that, 3 years ago, would have been unthinkable. He opened a back channel to a deputy assistant director of the FBI's Organized Crime Division. Marco's jaw went slack when he heard. "I'm doing what Isabella wanted," Lucas said quietly. "I am ending this family's life in the underworld. Victor and Volkov for the whole organization's immunity. I am burning the empire down myself." His next move was the one that hurt. He walked into the East Wing and told Hannah she had 48 hours to pack what she needed. A secured apartment in Manhattan was waiting for her and Lily. Hannah's face went white. "Why so suddenly? I can't explain yet. But you have to go, just for a few days." She searched his eyes and saw something in them she had only seen once before. 3 years of agony pressed into a single look. She nodded. Before the car left that morning, Lily wrapped both her arms around Lucas's waist and would not let go. "You're gonna come back to me, right, Mr. Lucas?" He knelt down and pulled her tight against his chest. "I promise, little angel, I'll come home." Hannah stood in the doorway, suitcase at her feet. "Please be careful." Lucas took her hand. "When this is over, there are a lot of things I want to tell you." She held his hand for 1 more second, then turned and climbed into the back of the sedan with her daughter. Marco pulled the car through the front gates of the estate and turned east toward the city. 400 yards down the service road, a black SUV eased out from behind a row of hedges and slid into traffic 6 cars behind them. Its headlights did not turn on. The black SUV behind them had eyes on the road and a radio tuned to a frequency only Victor Romano used. From his third-floor office in the mansion, Victor had watched the sedan pull through the front gates on his own security feed, and he had understood two things at once. First, that Lucas now knew everything. Second, that he had exactly one move left on the board. He made 3 phone calls. 6 miles later, on a stretch of service road through the wetlands of eastern Queens, where cell coverage failed and no cameras existed, Marco saw the headlights multiply in his rearview mirror. A white van cut him off from the front. 2 sedans boxed him from the sides. The black SUV closed the door behind. "Get down!" he roared. "Get down on the floor. Now!" Hannah wrapped her body over her daughter as the first burst of gunfire tore through the windshield. Glass rained across the hood. Marco's left arm jerked, a bright red blossom opening through the sleeve of his jacket. But he kept his right hand on his weapon. He shouldered open the door, rolled out behind the engine block, and started firing. He dropped 3 men before the 4th round caught him in the side. "Mama, I'm scared," Lily sobbed against her mother's chest, her little body shaking uncontrollably. "Close your eyes, baby. Close your eyes and don't look. Don't look. Don't look." Marco managed to rise one more time, pistol shaking in his hand. A rifle butt cracked across the back of his skull. He went down into the wet grass and did not move. Heavy gloved hands yanked open the rear door. Hannah bit and clawed like a cornered animal as they pulled her out, but there were too many of them, and they did not care about bruises. Lily was lifted over a shoulder like a sack of flour, her small arm reaching for her mother across empty air. The last vehicle to arrive on the scene was a long black Mercedes with tinted glass. The rear door opened. Polished leather shoes stepped out. Victor Romano walked across the gravel with his hands in the pockets of his overcoat, calm as a man arriving at a dinner party. The careful warmth he had worn inside the mansion for 15 years was gone. What stood in front of them now had the face of a stranger, older and uglier, as if a mask had finally been peeled off. Hannah's knees nearly buckled. "Victor, it's you?" "Hello, Mrs. Carter." His smile was thin and polite. "I have been extraordinarily patient with the 2 of you, but patience has an expiration date, and I happen to need some bait." They were driven in silence across the Verrazano Bridge to an abandoned shipping warehouse on the western edge of Staten Island, a concrete cavern that had not seen a legitimate shipment in a decade. Rope bit into Hannah's wrists. A smaller cord, gentler but no less cruel, bound Lily to the chair beside her. At that exact moment, 60 miles north, Lucas Moretti's private phone vibrated on his desk. The screen lit up with a video. His wife's replacement, bound, a little girl sobbing, her nose running, her braids lopsided from a struggle. A voice he had trusted for 15 years, speaking behind the camera. "Lucas. Old friend, I think it's time we finally had an honest conversation." Lucas stood very slowly. Something inside him that had been breathing for 5 weeks stopped breathing again. "You killed my wife," he said into the phone, his voice a wire stretched too tight. "You killed my son. You will die tonight, Vincenzo Falcone." There was a pause on the other end, a small, surprised laugh. "So, you did find out. Good. Then listen carefully. You come alone. No weapons, no federal friends. You will be at the Mariner's Warehouse on Staten Island in 90 minutes. If I see so much as a shadow I don't recognize, I will start removing the little girl's fingers. Am I understood?" The phone nearly shattered in Lucas's hand. Within 40 minutes, he had assembled every loyal soldier in the Moretti Empire in the mansion's war room. Marco, bandaged at the shoulder, alive thanks to a passing state trooper, stood at his side. The FBI deputy director was already on a secure line. "I go in alone." Exactly as he said, Lucas told them. "You encircle the building at a 400-yard perimeter. You wait for my signal. You do not move before it." Before he left the mansion, he did something he did not explain to anyone. He walked into the piano room. He laid his palm flat across the cool ivory keys one last time. "Isabella," he whispered into the silence, "watch over me tonight. And if I don't come home, open the gates for me." Inside the Staten Island warehouse, Hannah pressed her bound forehead against her daughter's. "Baby, listen to me," she whispered. "Remember what Mama taught you. Whatever happens tonight, you live. You stay strong. Mama, is Mr. Lucas going to come save us?" Hannah's throat locked. "He's coming. I know he is." Victor paced slowly in front of them, hands clasped behind his back, like a teacher delivering a lesson. "Do you know the truly beautiful part?" he mused. "Lucas loved me like a brother, and I used that love to destroy him, piece by piece. For 40 years. Isn't that exquisite?" Lily lifted her tear-streaked face, her small eyes fixed on Victor without a flicker of fear. "You're a bad man. I knew it the first day." For a single second, Victor Romano, the man who had outwitted an entire Italian crime family for 4 decades, could not find his next breath. And somewhere outside, far down the dark service road, the low rumble of Lucas Moretti's engine began to grow. The heavy steel door of the warehouse rolled open with a long, grinding scream. Lucas Moretti stepped through it alone. No vest, no jacket, only a white button-down shirt, black dress pants, and 2 raised hands, palms open to the light of the swinging industrial bulbs overhead. He did not look like the heir to an empire. He looked like a man walking into his own funeral. "I'm here," he said. "Let them go." Victor Romano stepped out from between 2 stacks of rusted shipping containers, arms spread wide, smiling like a priest at his own wedding. Around him, 20 armed men from Dmitry Volkov's crew spread across the warehouse floor in a careful semicircle, AK-47s and pistols trained on every inch of Lucas. From the shadows behind them, an older man in a long black wool coat stepped forward, silver hair, pale blue eyes, the face of the Russian ghost who had been bleeding Lucas's territory for 3 years. "Moretti," Dmitry Volkov said in his heavy accent. "At long last we meet." "Volkov," Lucas answered without moving his hands. "You are working with a snake. Sooner or later he will put his teeth in you too." Dmitry laughed. "Of course he will, but I intend to enjoy the profits long before that night arrives." Victor walked a slow circle around Lucas, pulled his hands behind his back, and bound them to a wooden chair that had been placed beside Hannah and Lily. The rope went over the wrists. The rope went over the chest. Every loop tightened like a prayer answered. Victor crouched in front of him, eye to eye. "Let me tell you the whole story, Lucas. I have waited 40 years to tell someone this story." He began with his father, with a plate of lasagna, with 4 men in long coats and a mother who walked into the Hudson with stones in her pockets. He spoke of an orphanage on Staten Island, a promise carved into a child's heart, a quarter-century of smiles poured over rotten meat. Lucas listened, and while he listened, he turned his head by 1 careful degree and looked at Hannah. She understood instantly. Stall, keep him talking. 400 yards beyond the warehouse walls, Marco crouched behind a concrete pylon with a federal tactical team on his left and 15 Moretti soldiers on his right. In his earpiece, every word Victor was speaking came through loud and clear, relayed from the tiny transmitter hidden inside the lapel pin on Lucas's shirt. "Not yet," Marco breathed into his throat mic. "Not yet. Wait for the signal." Inside, Victor had reached the part about the Brooklyn Bridge. His voice had taken on a rich, wet pleasure. It was in that moment that a small 6-year-old voice sliced through the air like a knife through wet paper. "Biscuit, Biscuit the cat." Victor jerked his head toward Lily, his eyebrows drawing together. Lily stared at him through her tears, her little chin lifted. "I miss my cat, Biscuit." Outside, Marco's hand closed around his radio. "Go, go, go." The first flashbang punched through the side window and ignited the warehouse in white thunder. Smoke grenades followed, thick gray clouds rolling across the floor. The Volkov men opened fire blind into the haze, shouting in Russian. Lucas surged to his feet. The rope binding his wrists had been looped twice instead of 3 times, a detail he had quietly engineered during his own binding. He snapped free in a single violent twist, tore the rope off his chest, and drove his shoulder into the nearest gunman's ribs. The man's rifle clattered into his hands. He fired twice. 2 bodies dropped. He was already moving toward Hannah and Lily, slicing through their ropes with a blade pulled from the dead gunman's belt. "Stay behind me. Keep low." The 3 of them moved through the smoke in a tight, crouched line toward the loading door at the rear of the warehouse. Bullets sparked off the metal beams above their heads. A Volkov soldier lunged from the left. Lucas put him down without breaking stride. They were 10 feet from the exit when Victor stepped out of the smoke like a devil summoned from it, a long black hunting knife gleaming in his hand. "You are not walking out of here, Lucas." Lucas shoved Hannah and Lily behind a steel pillar and turned. The 2 men crashed into each other with the sound of old bones breaking. Victor had 40 years of hatred in his arms. Lucas had 3 weeks of love in his. Fists, elbows, knees. The knife flashed in the dim orange light. Victor was faster than he had any right to be. The blade found Lucas's stomach. Lucas staggered back, hand clamping to his side, warm red spilling through his fingers. "Lucas!" Hannah screamed, breaking from behind the pillar. Lily ran toward him on tiny bare feet. "Mr. Lucas." Victor raised the knife above his head, his face a mask of 40 years of grief turned into venom. "This is the end of the last Moretti." A single gunshot cracked through the warehouse. Victor's body jerked once, then dropped sideways into the smoke. Marco stood in the open doorway, pistol raised, a thin curl of gray smoke drifting from the muzzle. That, Marco said quietly, was for Isabella and Daniel. Across the warehouse floor, Dmitry Volkov turned to flee through a side door and ran straight into 3 FBI agents in tactical gear. He was on his knees in cuffs before he could finish his first word in Russian. By the time the smoke had cleared, 15 of Volkov's men lay dead on the concrete. 5 more were in handcuffs. The war was over. Lucas was on his knees, one hand pressed to his stomach, the other reaching blindly for the small face that had found him. Hannah had dropped down behind him, cradling his head against her chest. Lily was sobbing into his bloody shirt. "Please, Mr. Lucas. Please don't die. Please." Lucas's trembling hand rose and rested against the side of her wet cheek. "Not yet, little angel," he whispered. "Not yet." The sirens of the first ambulance tore into the warehouse parking lot within minutes. Paramedics in dark blue jackets lifted Lucas onto a stretcher. One of them pressed both gloved hands against his abdomen, shouting numbers that no one in the family circle understood, but everyone understood meant too much. The knife had gone deep. Internal bleeding, possible organ damage. A pressure cuff squeezing around his arm registered a blood pressure that made the younger paramedic's face turn white. Hannah climbed into the back of the ambulance without asking permission. She lifted Lily onto her lap with one arm and gripped Lucas's cold, trembling hand with the other, as if her fingers alone could hold his soul inside his body. The oxygen mask fogged with his shallow breath. His lips were pale. "Hannah," he rasped. "I'm sorry. Don't talk." Her voice cracked. "Please don't talk. Save your strength." Lily leaned forward until her small face was inches from his. "Mr. Lucas, you promised. You promised you'd come home with me." A tiny, painful smile pulled at the corner of his mouth. "I remember, little angel. I remember my promise." His eyes slid closed. At Mercy General Hospital, a surgical team was already waiting at the ER bay. Lucas was wheeled through a set of swinging doors under bright white lights, and those doors swung shut between him and Hannah with a cold mechanical click that she felt all the way down to her bones. 8 hours. For 8 hours, Hannah sat in the surgical waiting room with Lily curled against her side. Marco sat across from them with his left arm in a fresh sling, a bandage taped across his temple. Federal agents came and went through the corridor in low, professional murmurs. At some point, while Lily dozed beneath her mother's jacket, Marco leaned forward and spoke in a careful, quiet voice. "Hannah, there are things you deserve to know. About Victor, about the boss, about why this happened tonight." And Marco told her everything. The little boy in the orphanage, the name Vincenzo Falcone, buried under the name Victor Romano, the 15-year deception, the Brooklyn Bridge, the magnetic device under Isabella's car, the 3 years of false condolences, of whiskey at 3 in the morning, of a killer wearing a brother's face. Hannah sat perfectly still as the tears rolled down her cheeks without sound. She understood now. Every silence Lucas had carried, every door he had locked, every piece of himself he had frozen shut. 3 years of carrying that weight alone, and he had still opened his arms to her daughter. Lily slept against her. Small fingers curled tight around the old pink plastic inhaler she had refused to let go of. Hannah looked down at that tiny sleeping face and thought, "My little girl changed more lives tonight than most grown men change in a lifetime." At 8 minutes after 4 in the morning, the surgical doors swung open and a tired woman in green scrubs walked toward them, mask pulled down to her chin. "Mrs. Carter?" Hannah rose, legs trembling. "Mr. Moretti is through the worst of it. 2 organs nicked, significant blood loss. But he's stable. He's going to need a long recovery, but he's going to live." Hannah's knees gave out. She sank back into the plastic chair and pressed her daughter's sleeping head against her chest and wept without apology. They moved Lucas to the surgical ICU. A nurse quietly told Hannah she could step inside for a few minutes. She walked in alone. He was lying very still against pale green sheets, an oxygen tube along his jaw, IV lines in both arms, a soft beeping from the monitor that was the most beautiful music she had heard in her life. His face, without the armor of his waking hours, looked younger, gentler, like a boy she had never been allowed to meet. She sat beside the bed and took his hand in both of hers. "You have to get better," she whispered. "Lily needs you, and I need you too." It was the first time she had spoken the word "I" to him in that soft, uncovered way. She caught herself. Her cheeks flushed. She started to pull her hand back. His fingers tightened weakly around hers. His eyes fluttered open, barely. "What did you say?" "Nothing. I don't go." She froze. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The monitors beeped softly between them. The machines breathed. "When I thought I was going to die," Lucas rasped. "All I could see was the two of you." Hannah's tears fell onto their joined hands. "I thought the same thing tonight. If I lost you, I didn't know how I would go on." A small, broken smile. "Then we have to keep going, together." She nodded. She could not speak. Behind her, a small voice from the doorway. "You didn't leave me." Lily ran across the room in her socks and climbed carefully, reverently, onto the edge of the bed, her small hands flat against Lucas's chest, as if she were afraid he might disappear if she let go. He lifted one trembling arm and drew her gently to him. Hannah leaned forward and wrapped her arms around both of them. The three of them stayed like that, one tangled knot of held breath, while somewhere outside the long hospital window, a thin gold line of sunrise began to rise slowly over the East River. That first golden sunrise over the East River turned out to be the beginning of a season of sunrises. Lucas Moretti's recovery stretched across 6 long weeks. The stab wound had nicked his liver and his small intestine, and for the first 10 days he could barely sit up without assistance. Hannah was there for every shift, change, every dressing replacement, every painful morning when he had to learn how to walk again. Lily brought him flowers from the hospital gift shop and crayon drawings taped to his IV pole. In those same 6 weeks, an entire empire was quietly dismantled. Lucas handed federal investigators 3 decades of financial records, shipping manifests, and encrypted ledgers, enough evidence to gut what remained of the Volkov organization from Brighton Beach to the Baltic Sea. Dmitry Volkov, offered no deal, was sentenced to life in a maximum security facility in Colorado. Victor Romano's body was claimed by no one. He was buried in a plain pine box in a municipal plot on Hart Island. No flowers, no priest, no name on the stone. The Moretti family itself, the oldest criminal dynasty on the East Coast, ceased to exist on paper and in practice. In exchange for full cooperation, Lucas received federal immunity and a quiet agreement that the name Moretti would never again appear on an indictment. He spent the next 2 months converting every dollar, every asset, every property into legitimate ventures. A hotel group in the Hamptons, a small restaurant chain, a venture capital firm focused on first-generation immigrant businesses in Queens. Marco, who had taken a bullet for him and still kept walking, became his equal partner at the new company. His business card read simply, Marco Caruso, Vice President, and he pinned it to his refrigerator at home like a boy with his first report card. Rosa, who had served 3 generations of Morettis, finally had time on her hands. She used it to bake. Apple pies on Sundays, fresh bread every morning, cannoli on Lily's half-birthdays. The mansion that had once been forbidden the smell of food now smelled permanently of cinnamon and warm butter. Hannah no longer wore a housekeeper's uniform. She moved into the East Wing permanently, not as an employee, but as a woman finding her feet again. She enrolled in an accelerated nursing refresher program at NYU, and on the morning she received her acceptance letter, Lucas stood in the kitchen doorway with 2 cups of coffee and a smile she had never seen before on his face. "You deserve your dream back, Hannah." Lily returned to school, this time at a bright little private academy 20 minutes from the estate. She joined the art club and the choir, and made a best friend named Priya, whose laugh could be heard from 3 classrooms away. In her backpack, she still carried the old pink plastic inhaler from the hallway, the one she now called her magic inhaler, the thing that had stitched 3 people together. One quiet afternoon near the end of Lucas's recovery, Lily padded into his study carrying a crayon drawing bigger than her own torso. In the drawing, 3 figures stood under a bright yellow sun, hand in hand, a tall man in a black suit, a woman with dark curls, a small girl with 2 braids. She held it out to him with both hands. "Mr. Lucas, would you be my daddy?" He slid off the armchair and lowered himself onto his knees, even though it still hurt his stitches to do so. "Sweetheart, are you sure?" She nodded solemnly. "I miss my real daddy a lot, but he came to see me in a dream last week, and he said you were supposed to be my new daddy. He said he was happy." Lucas pulled her into his arms, and this time the tears came without any effort to hide them. Hannah, standing quietly in the doorway with a laundry basket on her hip, pressed her fist to her mouth and felt her heart dissolve into something warm she could not name. That evening, after Lily had gone to sleep, Lucas walked Hannah out to the rose garden. "Do you know what your daughter said to me today?" She smiled softly. "I know. She told me yesterday she was going to ask you. What do you think? I know it may be too soon. We've only known each other a few months." Hannah shook her head slowly and looked up at him, her eyes bright. It's not months, Lucas. It's a whole lifetime of grief leading both of us here. And I believe in destiny. From the inside pocket of his jacket, he drew a small velvet box. Inside lay a simple gold pendant shaped like 3 figures holding hands. A mother, a father, a child. I don't want to move too fast, he said quietly. But I want you to know, I've chosen you. Both of you. She took the pendant with trembling fingers, then stepped into his chest and wrapped her arms around him. Their first kiss was as soft as the evening breeze in that garden. Somewhere inside the house, through the open window of the piano room, the imperfect, beautiful sound of a 6-year-old girl practicing her first real lesson drifted out onto the lawn. The melody of a beginning. 6 months after the night at the Staten Island warehouse, the world had rearranged itself around the Moretti mansion. The scars on Lucas's abdomen had faded to thin pink lines. The scars on Hannah's heart had softened into something she could carry without stumbling. And Lily, who had turned 7 in April with a cake made entirely of strawberries at her own insistence, had a full honor roll report card pinned to the refrigerator door beside Marco's old business card. The morning came when Lucas knelt on the kitchen floor beside the little girl who had saved his life and asked her a question that had taken weeks of paperwork to make possible. Would you let me become your dad on paper too? So that no one, no judge, no school, no stranger in the world could ever say you aren't mine? Lily did not hesitate for even a breath. Yes, Daddy. It was the first time she had said the word. The day of the adoption hearing arrived on a bright Tuesday in October. Lily wore her favorite white sundress, white shoes with little daisy buckles, and a pale yellow ribbon in her hair. She stood between Lucas and Hannah in a paneled courtroom on Lower Broadway, one hand tucked into each of theirs. Judge Eleanor Haynes, a kind-faced woman in her 60s with silver reading glasses perched on her nose, peered gently over the bench. Lily Carter, do you understand what's happening today? Yes, ma'am. Do you agree, of your own free will, to let Mr. Lucas Moretti become your legal father? Lily stood on her toes to be tall enough. Yes, ma'am. I want it so much. The judge smiled. In that case, by the power of this court, she signed. The gavel came down softly. Lily Carter was, from that moment on, officially, Lily Moretti Carter. Back at the estate that afternoon, Rosa had turned the formal dining hall into a small festival of ribbons and white flowers. Marco was there with his new wife, Elena, a soft-spoken paramedic he had married quietly in July, along with 2 of the allied Italian family heads who now ran only restaurants, a handful of Lily's friends from school, and a beaming Bennett from the kitchen. Rosa carried out a 2-layer cake she had spent all morning decorating. On top, in royal icing, stood 3 little marzipan figures holding hands. Lily closed her eyes and blew out the single tall candle. It's not my birthday, she announced to the room, but today is the birthday of our new family. Everyone clapped until their palms were red. Lucas and Hannah had agreed months earlier not to rush into a wedding. They wanted everything to happen in its own time. But that evening, as the last guest drove away and the house went quiet, Lucas held out his hand and led the 2 of them into the rose garden. The sun was just beginning to turn the sky pink over the hedges. I don't need paperwork to know the 2 of you are my family, Lucas said softly. But I want us to have our own moment. Just the 3 of us. He slipped a small velvet pouch from his jacket pocket. Inside were 3 simple gold bands, a woman's, a child's, a man's, each engraved on the inside with a single word, family. He slid the smallest one onto Lily's little ring finger, where it fit like it had been made for her. He slid the second one onto Hannah's hand. He placed the last one on his own. From this moment on, we are one. This family is forever. Hannah was already crying. Lily leapt up and wrapped her arms around both of them, her small voice crowing into the evening air. I love you, Daddy. I love you, Mommy. At that exact moment, a small white butterfly drifted across the lawn on a breath of autumn wind, lingered for one impossible second near their joined hands, and fluttered away into the last golden light. Lucas felt Hannah's fingers tighten around his. Neither of them needed to say it. Later that week, on a cool Saturday morning, the 3 of them drove out to a quiet cemetery in Westchester County where 2 gravestones sat side by side beneath an old oak tree. Lucas knelt and laid a bouquet of white lilies between them. Isabella, Daniel, he said softly, I hope the 2 of you aren't angry with me. I found a new road, but you are still part of my heart. You always will be. Hannah stepped forward and set down her own small bundle of wildflowers. Isabella, thank you for raising such a good man. I promise I'll love him the way you loved him. Lily squatted down with a folded piece of paper in both hands and tucked it carefully against the base of Daniel's stone. I think you and me would have been good friends, Danny. I drew us playing together. I hope heaven has coloring books. The three of them stood in silence for a long while. Above them, the October sky slowly turned a deep, forgiving red, as if the whole horizon were blessing both the chapter that had ended and the one just beginning. 1 month after the adoption ceremony, on a quiet Thursday morning, Rosa walked into the sunroom with a small cream-colored envelope in her hand and a worried crease between her eyebrows. Mr. Moretti. This was in the front mailbox. There is no postage, no return address. Someone placed it there by hand. Lucas set down his coffee and took the envelope. He slid a letter opener along the edge. Inside was a single photograph. Lily, in her Navy school uniform, stepping out of the black car at the front gate of her academy. The angle suggested the photographer had been standing across the street with a long lens. On the back, scrawled in thick black marker, were 6 words: "We are not done with you, Moretti." Cold poured down the length of Lucas's spine. Whoever had taken that photo had been close enough to hear his daughter laugh. He made 2 calls. Within hours, Marco and a quiet contact at the FBI confirmed his fear. A small cell of Volkov loyalists, roughly 10 men, had slipped out of the country during the raids 6 months earlier. Recently, they had drifted back into the tri-state area, determined to honor their imprisoned boss with one final act of revenge against the man who had destroyed him. Lucas did not tell Hannah. He did not want to fracture the peace Lily had just begun to take for granted. Instead, he tripled the perimeter security around the estate and added 2 undercover escorts to Lily's school run. That evening, Marco sat across from him in the study, grim-faced. "Boss, let me move them. A safe house upstate for 2 weeks. We finished the job without them in the blast radius." Lucas stared into the cold fireplace for a long time. "No," he said finally. "I've spent my whole life running, hiding, looking over my shoulder. Not this time. This time, I end it myself." He opened a secure line with the bureau. Together they built a trap. Lucas would make a public appearance at a real estate conference in Midtown, stand in front of every camera in the room, make himself the most obvious target on the East Coast. The FBI would be waiting in every car around the block. But Hannah, his Hannah, had grown too close to him to miss it. She cornered him in the bedroom that night as he was sorting through a duffel bag. "You're hiding something from me." He tried to deflect. Her eyes held his, and he could not lie into them, so he told her everything. She covered her mouth with both hands. "I cannot lose you again, Lucas. I cannot." He pulled her into his chest and held her tight. "You won't. Not this time. This time, I pull it up by the root." The next afternoon, Lily climbed into his lap with a troubled little face. "Daddy, there are some strange men near my school gate. They look at me funny. One of them has a scar on his hand." Lucas's jaw locked. They were already watching her. The plan changed within the hour. The bureau traced cell towers, surveillance vans, movement patterns. Within 48 hours, the cell's hideout was pinpointed inside an abandoned textile warehouse on the Jersey City waterfront. A joint strike team moved on the building before dawn, 8 men in handcuffs by sunrise, 2 more dead on the floor when they reached for their rifles. Not a single one escaped. Lucas walked through the front doors of the mansion that evening, exhausted, still smelling faintly of tactical smoke. Hannah ran across the foyer and threw her arms around him. Lily was a second behind her, wrapping herself around his waist. "Is it done?" Hannah whispered into his shirt. "It's done," he said quietly. "This time, truly done." Later that night, he lit tall white candles in the piano room. He sat down at the bench of Isabella's piano, rolled up his sleeves, and placed his fingers on the ivory keys he had not touched in 3.5 years. He played Claude Debussy's Clair de Lune from memory. The notes rose slowly, soft and silver, filling the hallways and the chandeliers and the long red carpets with the music this mansion had been waiting to hear again. Hannah sat on the small couch with Lily curled asleep against her side. Candlelight flickered on all 3 faces. Somewhere between the first and the last note, Lucas Moretti finished his healing. "Dear friends, we want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts for staying with Lucas, Hannah, and little Lily all the way to this moment. Stories like this remind us of a very simple truth. The smallest act of kindness, even from the smallest hands, can crack open the hardest wall in the strongest heart. We never know whose life we might change when we stop to help a stranger. We never know which lonely soul is waiting for one honest smile, one warm meal, one kind word, to begin believing in the world again. In a time where so many people are carrying silent pain, let us be the kind of people who lean down, look another human being in the eye, and say, 'You are not alone.' If this story moved you, please do not forget to hit the subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and share it with someone who needs a little hope today. Your support is what allows us to keep bringing you heartfelt stories every single day. We would love to hear from you. Which part of this story touched you the most? Has someone ever been your Lily, the unexpected angel who pulled you back from a dark place? Or have you been that angel for someone else? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one, and your stories are what warm our hearts the most. To every single one of you watching tonight, we wish you good health, peaceful days, a home filled with laughter, and a heart that stays brave enough to love again, no matter how many times it has been broken. Take care of yourselves, be gentle with those around you, and remember that even in the darkest hallway, there is always a small hand holding out a light. Thank you for watching. We will see you in the next video. Goodbye, and take care.